He lay back against the rock in the dark dank of the cave and tried to regain his breath and collect his thoughts. It was only now that he cried, for it was only now that he understood that he was an orphan and quite alone in the world. Worse, he had run away and abandoned his own father. A voice spoke to him from the mouth of the cave. They did not kill him. It was a girl's voice. She stood silhouetted against the light, a willowy figure, a bow in her hand, a quiver of arrows on her back. They did not kill him, she repeated. We saw them. They took him away. Filled with sudden hope, Robin started to his feet. Are you sure? He came towards her and then stopped dead. I am Marian. She was a young woman and not a girl at all, and I wish you would not stare at me like that. Her hair was as white, not silver like an old person's, not fair as his mother's had been, but white, pure white. Her eyes seemed to glow red in the early morning sun. You're an outlaw, aren't you? He breathed. We all are, said Marian quietly, and she turned and ran off. Robin followed. As he emerged from the cold of the cave, he saw that the valley below him was filled with people, all of them gazing up at him and silent. Some had long white hair to their shoulders, like the women. Some looked like children first, but they were not. They were dwarves. Every one of them was dressed in the green of the forest. There were hunchbacks in amongst them, and it was one of these, the tallest, a hunting horn in one hand, that stepped forward and spoke up. Your father was a good man. He fed the hungry. He fed the poor. We saw him. We watched him. We know everything and everyone that moves in the forest. We have to. Now he is gone. You are one of us. Like us, you are an outlaw. Chapter 3. The warning words of the village priest rang loudly in Robin's head. With a wolf, you walk away slowly, and he will leave you alone. With a bear, you look at him in the eyes, and he will stay still. But pray you never ever see an outlaw. If you do, then run for your life. Outlaws are child-eaters. Outlaws are bloodsuckers. There was nowhere to run to, and no time either. Robin was surrounded by half a dozen outlaws who were plucking at his sleeve and grinning up at him. There was a wildness in their eyes that alarmed him at first, but then he saw that they were smiling eyes. These were no cutthroats. These were no child-eaters. They were reaching up and touching his hair, his ears, but their touches were gentle, inquisitive. Marian was there beside him. One or two of them were babbling incoherently. What are they saying? Robin asked. They're just happy you're with us, can't you tell? Can't they speak? Of course they can, but not like you or me. The sheriff caught them. He had their tongues out for the sport of it. Then the hunchback who had first spoken to him was limping towards him. I'm Will Scarlet, he said, holding out his hand. You're welcome, Robin. Let's get you home. And so Robin was led away into the forest by his escort of outlaws. They went to run, but silently. Not a twig cracked, not a leaf rustled. All around him the forest flitted with darting shadows. They were coming too, all of them. He looked everywhere for Marian, but could not see her. All day it seemed they travelled on, down deer tracks he never knew, and deeper into the forest than he had ever been in his life. It was the evening before they came to a cliff face that rose sheer out of the forest. It didn't stop them. They plunged suddenly into the darkness of what seemed to be a vast cave. Then they were running along a tunnel towards a pinprick of light at the other end, out crossing a clearing, down a ravine, and into the thick forest again. When at long last they stopped, they stood still, breathing hard and listening. Before Robin knew it, clambering children were running towards him out of the trees. Many of those had Marian's white hair and pink eyes, and one hobbled along behind the other on a crutch, his leg twisted inwards. There were leopards too. Robin saw faces and fingers eaten away by the disease. He shield away, trying to fend them off, and was relieved to see that Marian coming towards him. She took his hand and made off with him, shooing the children back. They ate wild pig that night, all of them sitting in the shadows of a great crackling fire, but Robin had no stomach for it. It was just that he felt their eyes watching him all the time, though he was part of it. You don't speak, you don't eat, said Will Scarlet. What's the matter? They'll hang him, won't they? My father, they'll hang him. You were there, weren't you? You saw it all. She said you did. Why didn't you help? How? Said Will Scarlet. With what? Would you have us fight with our bare hands against armed soldiers? You hold your dagger and you ran. If you hadn't, then you would be in Nottingham tonight and tomorrow morning. They'd be stretching your neck alongside your father. How would that help? Tell me that. Your father's a good man, Robin, known everywhere in the forest for his kindness. And he's a wise man too. He told you to run, didn't he? He knows what we know, that to survive is everything. We have to survive. Until good King Richard comes back from his crusade and brings us justice, we have to survive. So we wait, do we? Robin protested. We just wait until the king decides to come back. Meanwhile, Guy of Gisborne starves my mother to death and the sheriff of Nottingham hangs my father. You wait if you like. I will not wait. He hurled his meat into the fire. I will eat nothing until my father is safe here in the forest, or I am dead. Will Scarlet reached forwards and gripped Robin by the wrist. Do you think you are the only one to suffer at this butcher's hand? Look around you, Robin. A motley bunch of misfits, aren't we? There's every mutation you can imagine here. There's me, a hunchback, and there's half a dozen more the same. There's white-haired Cagots, albinos, call them what you like Marion. There's simple folk who talk to the moon in puddles. There's lepers, there's one-legged beggars. Blind, deaf, dumb, we're all here, all misfits, all outlaws. And why do you suppose we're here? Well, I'll tell you. Until the sheriff came, most of us lived in Nottingham as others live. Oh yes, they'd laugh at us, curse us, throw stones at us. But when you're like we are, you have to put up with that. Water off a duck's back. But the new sheriff wanted us out. Human vermin, he called us. The work of the devil. And there were plenty of greedy priors and grasping abscesses to tell him he was right, if he paid them enough. To all of them we were rats, to be driven out. And he did it all legally too. After all, it's the sheriff that makes the laws, isn't it? He's the king's man in Nottingham. His word is the king's word, and he must be obeyed. First, we weren't allowed to hold property in Nottingham. I was a tailor, and a good one. They closed me down. Then we weren't allowed to sleep within the city walls. We could work by day, but every night they drove us out of the city and closed the gates. If you were caught inside the nightfall, you had your tongue pulled out. Winter nights were cold in the forest. A few risked it, and hid in Nottingham. They lost their tongues for their pains. But he hadn't finished with us. Oh, no. He passed another law. All outlaws he had named us for now were not allowed to be in the back of the city at all. So we left family, friends, everything and everyone, and we came here to live in the forest. The monks and priests put it about in the pulpits that we are devil worshippers, child-eaters, bloodsuckers. I see you heard the stories too. So we live here and we survive. We have become creatures of the forest, creatures of the dark, and we wait for the king to come, for the justice we deserve. If we fight them in the open, then they will destroy us. They are too many and too strong. So we rob what we need. The sheriff's men look for us, but they cannot find us. We have lookouts all over Sherwood. If anyone comes into the forest, we know it. That's why we were there this morning. Will Scarlet held up his father's great bow. Here, your father dropped this. I found it. It's yours now, Robin. Robin took his father's bow and held it in both hands. When he spoke so softly through his tears that they strained to listen. I cannot sit with you, warm by the fire, and think of my father alone in the cold dungeon. My father cannot wait for the king's justice. He lifted his head. I will not hide away like a rabbit all my life, bolting from my hole at the first sign of the sheriff's men. He saw the hurt come into Will Scarlet's eyes, and at once wished he had not spoken too harshly. I didn't mean it like that, he went on. You must do what you must do, and I must try to save my father. All I ask is you lend me a dagger and some arrows and set me on the road to Nottingham. I will do the rest myself. Will Scarlet stood up and took Robin by the shoulders. Any man would be proud to have a son like you, he said, and he gave him his dagger. Here, have this, and you have all the arrows you could want. Marion will take you to the road. God go with you, Robin. Marion led the way up the ravine, across the clearing, through the black of the cave, and out into the forest beyond. She was light on her feet and fast, so fast that she was often far in front of him. Robin would have lost sight of her entirely, were it not for her white hair moving through the trees ahead, like the moon dancing over water. Robin was beginning to wonder how much further they would have to go, when he saw her suddenly stop and crouch down in the undergrowth. He crouched beside her. Cross the stream ahead and follow the track, Marion whispered. You'll be in Nottingham by dawn. Robin made to go, but she held him back. Whatever happens, she said, you will come back to the forest, won't you? Robin looked into her eyes and could scarcely bring himself to look away. He saw the fierce faith in them. She believed in him utterly. I'll come back, he said, and when I do, I'll bring father with me. And he left her there without another word and ran off into the night. They were brave words, but Robin felt far from brave. The thought of what he had to do now was daunting. He knew Nottingham. He had lived there as a boy and had been there often enough since, driving pigs or sheep into the market with his father. He had often gazed up at the great wall of the castle and seen the barred windows of the dungeons on the far side of the moat white fingers gripping the bars. He'd seen the cages in the marketplace where prisoners were brought to be mocked and abused all morning long before they hanged them at noon. The sheriff's men would be everywhere, lolling on street corners, roaming the streets in gangs, filling the taverns. There were hundreds of them, and they would be armed to the teeth. Even now, Warren came out of Sherwood into the light of morning and saw the walls of the city rising from the mists in the distance. He had no notion of how he would set about finding his father, still less how he'd sprint him away and out of Nottingham. Over the next rise, and he would see the giblet of the bridge. Already he could see a few crows perched on a dead branch of a nearby oak tree, waiting. Here was where his father would be brought afterwards, after they hanged him in the market square. Then, and only then, a terrible thought came into Robin's mind. Perhaps they had done it already. Usually they'd do it at midday, when the market square was crowded. They would haul the prisoner out of the cage and drag him, screaming across the square, hang him and leave him there for an hour or two, and then bring him down to the gibbet. But maybe they had done it yesterday. Maybe they had taken him back to Nottingham and hanged him at once. Why else would the crows be there? "No!" Robin cried out loud. "No!" And he ran down the hill, his legs pounding, head back, tears streaming down his face, praying and praying he was not too late. The mist lay thick along the river banks. There was no river to see, no bridge and no gibbet. He could barely see the road in front of him now. The horse loomed suddenly out of the mists. Robin was going so fast he had no hope of stopping. He careered into an animal at full speed. The horse reared up, throwing his rider out of the saddle. As the mist lifted, the horse was cropping the grass busily beside the gibbet. Two men lay stretched out and senseless on the road. Robin woke, his head throbbing, and sat up. Above him he saw the gibbet, stark against the morning sky, and below it lay a soldier, still unconscious. He looked to Robin like one of the sheriff's men. "Maybe you were heaven sent," he breathed. "My size too, and a sword and a horse, all I could want." He left the soldier tousled up and gagged under the bridge, and emerged dressed in the mail and helmet of the sheriff's man, a sword at his side, his father bow over his shoulder. The horse was eating still, and easy enough to catch. The gates of Nottingham were open when Robin got there, and from all around people came streaming in for the market, carried along by the crush of the cattle and sheep and pigs and people. Robin rode up the narrow streets and into the market square. As expected, there were sheriff's men loitering by the castle gates, and the market traders were setting their stalls out in the square. The scaffold stood in the centre of it, the hanging rope swinging in the breeze. He had hoped to find his father already in one of the cages. It would have helped, but they were all empty.